Hello and welcome to So What You're Saying Is. I'm Peter Whitlaw. Now I'm delighted that this week we have with us one of the greats of BBC over the past 5 decades. Nigel Rees was the co-host of Quote Unquote, which was a show on the radio, which I'm sure maybe many of you are familiar with, which started something like 46 years ago. Nigel's obviously also a writer and author. He's written some 50 books, which is extraordinary. And he's with me now. Thank you very much for coming, Nigel. The reason you're here as well is that the show that I mentioned, Quote Unquote, is no more. You've left. Can you explain why?
Yes, because we have just reached our 500th edition, which is quite a landmark, spread over the 46 years. But I thought this was the time to think about whether to carry on with it, because, as you say, it has given me my life's work, if you like, with 50 books, and I've had a newsletter which has been going for 30 years. So the business of researching quotations has been what I do. But the trigger for calling it a day was COVID. Because this meant that we were no longer able to do as we had done for the past 44 years anyway, record it in front of a tightly packed studio audience and have the guests, all squashed up together. And this removed one of the great pluses of the programme. So we struggled over the final 2 series. The first one of those we recorded remotely, with 8 people in 8 different places and all the problems that involved. And then I said, I'm not going to do that again. So the last series we did socially distanced in a BBC studio. But this worked very well. You wouldn't have known that we were in 8 different places, but I didn't really think that this was what the show was about.
No. Obviously, there's been in the press recently is the show, which is one of the great stalwarts of BBC Radio, going. But you have talked about the different emphasis that's now being put on shows like yours, which is, if you might say, what the diversity agenda. How did that actually affect your show?
Well, I think it's been a gradual thing over the last, perhaps 20 years. I think initially, when it came to choosing the panelists, the guests on the programme, and this is a task I undertake with the producer, but I have a very strong input because my work has covered news and current affairs and arts and all the rest of it, so I have an awful lot of contacts. Yeah. So that was that. But perhaps 20 years ago, we suddenly heard that we really must address the gender issue. I think up to that point we had probably had 2/3 of the guests, if not more, were male, and it was not thought a good thing. So we did indeed bring in more female guests. So that was the start of it. But then the last 5 or 6 years, before the term woke had even been invented, I think, there were further pressures. Diversity was the big one, and of course, with Black Lives Matter 2 years ago, that really sort of put a rocket underneath it. So I was told that we could not have an all-white panel. And I challenged this at one point. I said, well, look, there are programs on radio and TV which do have all white panels. And they said, yes, but they have black people or persons of colour in the production team, which didn't seem to be a particularly valuable argument to me. But anyway, I went along with this, and we've had some extremely good, diverse guests. Then this last series, the final series, as it turned out, they came along and said, we've had complaints, the BBC has had complaints, Radio 4 has had complaints, that there aren't enough disabled guests on programmes. And I said, yes, but how do you know on radio? And I thought this was extremely strange. And I said, how do they know? These people who'd complained, who I think were talent agents, because they hadn't been able to get their people on.
Yes.
You see? I said, how do they know? But anyway, I said, well, who are you thinking of? Who could we have? And of course, the implication was that one couldn't just have them on, because you couldn't actually tell from radio whether a person was blind or in a wheelchair, whatever. So I had to make something of it in the program that they were disabled. I think that was the final straw, really. I thought, this is not necessary. All I want is people who can do the program, who are up for it, who are the right people for the program. Never mind what colour they are, what gender, what race, anything. So that's how it came up. But really, it's just one of the reasons why I decided to call it a day.
But this is the sort of thing, it does really interfere with, for want of a better expression, the creative process, doesn't it? Because other things are being put, as being of greater priority than maybe, as you say, the knowledge of the person or their expertise.
Well, somebody said to me the other day, is all this sort of emphasis on getting diverse people on the program, or disabled people, is this in fact affecting the nature of the program? Because if they've been chosen for these qualities, possibly it has led to people coming on the program who weren't really up to it. I don't know whether that is true or not. I don't really have a judgment on that. But it is possible that by thinking too much in terms of the sort of people you want to have on the program, you miss out on this more important factor of whether they're actually going to be able to do the program.
But how does it actually sort of practically work then, Nigel? I mean, when you say, there's sort of pressure to do this or whatever, from where? I mean, how do you not have autonomy anymore in
Well, I don't think I ever had autonomy. It has always been a joint process of me working with the producer, and possibly I work more closely with the producer because I own the format of the program and I write the script and I present the program, so I'm so involved that there was never any question of me not having input. But the way things work is that I was told in advance of the last series that, the BBC, whatever nebulous concept that is, had decided that there must be greater disabled representation. And so my producer, who was a very young person, 50 years younger than me, she presented me with a list of her suggestions in the same way as I had presented her with my suggestions. And almost all her suggestions were either disabled people or people from ethnic minorities, or activists. From organisations or gatherings which you wouldn't really think of were particularly relevant to the study of quotations. Activists, body shaming activists and all that.
Yes.
And I got a bit worked up about that. I said, well, who am I going to? Who are these people? And some of the disabled people. I'm not going to name names, but one of them. I will name him. There is a comedian who is known as No Voice because he can't speak. And he does it very well, but he has a machine like Stephen Hawking. So all his words, his jokes, have to be played from a tape recorder. Now, how on earth was I going to get him in a program which is a discussion program, which is sort of free form? But that was the sort of thing.
Yes.
And then somebody said to me, well, there are lots of disabled novelists and journalists. And I said, all right. So I literally Googled disabled journalist and came out with one who in fact we did have on the program, who was a very famous person, and he was wonderful, but I wouldn't have thought of him if I hadn't been pushed in that direction.
Yes. Presumably there's pressure on the actual content too.
Oh yes, and this was really what got my goat. I mean, I was very happy to have these suggestions as far as the guests were concerned. But when it came to the scripts, well, that was when I exploded. And the example which I've given is that in our 500th program, we have a spot in the program called detached lyrics. When you ask where do these lines come from a song, and you take away the music, you take away the context, and it's slightly difficult, but you know, we've done it lots of times. And the lines that I wanted to include were, in Bengal, to move at all is seldom, if ever, done. But mad dogs and Englishmen quite in the sun. And that was what I wanted to do. And then, you know, I would put it to the guest, we would sort it out, and then I would play Noel Coward singing the lines. The executive producer, having gone through my scripts and marked up all the various things that he didn't like, he said, no, you can't use that song because it reflects colonial attitudes.
But it does the reverse of that, doesn't it?
It does the reverse of that because it is poking fun at the colonial administrators or whoever, not at the natives. So that caused a big explosion on my part.
Yeah.
I said, this is ridiculous. This is straight out of the Black Lives Matter rule book, if you like, which is presumably why it came up. And I was persuaded. They said, oh, it's not a diktat, it's not a diktat, we're not in. But we would rather you chose something else. Noel Coward said lots of interesting things and witty things. Can't you choose something else? So I gave in, and I substituted something not by Noel Coward, but another thing.
Did your audience pick up on this kind of thing? I mean, did you get sort of feedback from the audience saying, no?
Well, they would hardly know, you see, because they wouldn't know what had been left out.
Yes.
But since I have made my position known, I've had lots of emails from people saying, oh, thank goodness you said something. Radio 4 has become so right on and all that they don't like it. And of course, I mean, I'm an old man, I'm 77, and a lot of Radio 4 listeners are, I think the average age is 56.
Is it really 56?
Something like that.
Right, okay.
And of course they are desperate to get younger listeners. I'm not terribly sure why, really, because if you are providing a wonderful service to people over 50, well, that's fine. They will die out, and they will be replaced by these young people growing older who will find it more to their taste as they grow older. So that is that.
With you mentioned that you alluded to that you own the format. That actually, so you withdraw. That's it. The program goes.
Oh yes, the program's finished.
So, but in another situation, presumably, and you were a host for a long time, they could do something like say, "Well, we need a new host or something," couldn't they?
Yeah, they could, but they can't do the program without me. So
yes, exactly, exactly. But
I noticed that thing. A number of other presenters, I mean, bigger names than me in TV and so on, are on the move at the moment. Andrew Marr, for example, said that he wanted to be able to speak in his own voice rather than through the BBC approved voice. And Adam Bolton of Sky News, I read that he's retiring or resigning or whatever, and he said, in the media is as it is today. I won't get anywhere because of I'm the wrong gender, I'm the wrong ethnicity, I'm possibly the wrong, I don't know, whatever. So there is this sort of feeling around, I think, that other people are not too happy with the way that they are really told to do their jobs.
But also, I think one of the possible effects as well is that it's hard to measure this, but it's also maybe alienating people because the end result is very what they might call woke washed.
Yes,
you know.
Yes.
I wondered, I mean, do you think, you mentioned there 20 years, but recently things have changed. Has there been a fundamental change at the BBC in this regard?
I think there has. I mean, I've worked for the BBC for 55 years, something like that. And I started with the Granada Television in Manchester, and that was another matter. But the BBC that I worked for in news and current affairs, I was the presenter of the Today programme, the famous Today programme, back in the 1970s. And I also did hours and hours of very serious news and current affairs with BBC World Service. The people who, my editors and producers in those days, I would say were very balanced people. They cared about the things that happened, and were very even-handed. I think that's probably the word. I have a feeling that perhaps very recently, perhaps the last 10 years, a lot of people have gone into news and current affairs. I don't think we're talking about that particularly. People who are activists or were party pre. They had positions, and this affected their judgment, really, or their input into the editorial process. I think that has definitely changed, and it has led to this. So there must be people now in the BBC who are setting these rules.
Yes, I mean, I do think it does. It's media wide. I think that.
Yeah. Oh yes.
It's media wide.
Yes.
It's just that the reason the BBC singled out maybe is because people pay for it. I suppose.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
I also, one thing that struck me, we were talking about it here before you came in, was that there are general cultural changes that have happened that I would have thought do affect programs such as yours. So your program does require a fair amount of knowledge, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes.
And when you look at, for example, some of the names that you've had on. I mean, Peter Ustinov, Kenneth Williams, Peter Cook, Kingsley Amis, all of these people. I suppose a certain level of knowledge would be assumed, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
That might have changed, might it not?
I think so. I mean, one of the big sort of changes on the guest front is the rise of the stand-up comedian.
Right.
Stand-up comedians now, I think this is perhaps goes back 20 years, I don't know. They are everywhere. Every TV panel game has stand-up comedians. That's their day job, but they also appear on all these panels, often on many panels, more than one. I mean, somebody like David Mitchell, for example, he's all never off.
Yes.
And I think that is okay, and I've gone along with this. I've said, yes, we can have such and such a stand-up comedian, provided they have something else. They have another string to their bow. They might have written a novel, or they might have done something specific that we can talk about. But there have been some who haven't, and there are some who just don't really have the knowledge. And so that is certainly something that has changed.
But that, I suppose, as well, and we take the Noel Coward example.
Yeah.
To me, Mad Dogs and Englishmen is a classic British popular song, as indeed Noel Coward. There would be surely many people now, adult people, who would not know the song.
Well, I suppose this also is one of the reasons why I brought the programme to a close, because my reference points are to when I was growing up and being educated in the 50s and the 60s. And in fact, at the beginning of the programme, we have 3 quotations over the signature, which we cut in very short quotations. And we put in quite a lot of comedy ones, like bits of Hancock, bits from The Goon Show, bits from Round the Horn. And these are very old shows now, and the modern generation won't really recognise what they are, what they're about. So I would say, yes, the cultural environment has changed. I had a letter this week, well, not a letter, an email, from someone who said, your people, they don't know anything. Even the obvious things. And the particular example that this person gave was, I asked a guest, who said this? And so to bed. And this person had no idea, and it was obvious when I told the person what the answer was, namely Samuel Pepys at the end of his diary entries. But I would have thought that was a quotation. Was it
Yes,
really?
yeah. This is. Does this mean if you were a listener, are you a listener much actually of radio now?
No, I'm not. Because if I am told about something on the radio, then I will get it on catch up, or BBC Sounds as it's now called. My wife listens to Radio 3 almost continuously, so that's what's on in the house.
Yeah, but do you watch? I mean, do you watch much BBC TV, for example, or
Not really. I've stopped watching the news because
why is that?
over the last 2 years it just becomes intolerable. And I also find, not because of bias or anything like that, but because I just find it rather irritating the way that it is presented. So I watch it for the drama, like most people, and documentaries on BBC Four, for example, which are wonderful. And the whole rise of the catch-up business makes it so much easier not to have to watch what you don't want to watch.
Can I ask what is it that's irritating about the way that the BBC, the news is now presented to you? What is it? Is it sensationalist? Or
No, I don't know. I wouldn't use that word at all. I think some of the newscasters are perhaps slightly pompous, and the correspondents. But really, what I find irritating about BBC News, it possibly also applies to ITN. I used to work for ITN back in the day. Is this business of the presenter? You have a little report from a correspondent, and then suddenly, they're standing in the middle of the desert or something like that, and suddenly the newscaster or the news presenter has to have a little two-way, and in which they ask feed questions. There is one female newscaster who asks questions like, "Oh, it's awful, isn't it?" and the reporter or correspondent out there in the desert, there's a slight pause, you notice, a digital pause. And they say, "That's right, Fiona." Oh, sorry, I'll give that away. But you know what I mean?
Yes.
This sort of feeding questions. It's very artificial, really. Well, when I was a presenter of a current affairs program, I asked the questions. They've obviously been given these on a card,
Is it fair to say, because we speak a lot about the BBC on this channel, but it's fair to say that you don't have a particular problem with the BBC, do you? I mean, you, in the sense that you don't want to see it go, or you don't want to see the licence fee go. Is that correct? Or?
Yes, no, I think I can't really see a solution to the licence fee problem, really. And I think that if it became like a Netflix service, you would lose all sorts of programs which, a commercially funded broadcaster would not make. And the BBC still has a public service mission. So that is that. Yeah.
What then, if you don't, we know what you don't listen, but what do you want? I mean, what about YouTube and things like that?
On YouTube, well, when I was doing quote unquote, it was a very useful thing on two fronts. One about the guests. If I was given a list of names of people, and in fact, the list that I referred to before, and I said, well, okay, but what are they like? Do they have a personality? Do they,
yes.
Or a speech impediment? What? And so I would and almost everybody now is on YouTube, and all these comedians, they all have a little, bit of their performances. And so I would use it for that purpose, to check out people. Sometimes it was very useful. Sometimes I'm, oh God, I'm not going to have that person. And the other thing on the quotations, once upon a time, if I wanted to check out a quotation in a film or a TV program or a political speech or something, I had to go to the BBC Sound Archives and request it. And it was a very elaborate. I can now, sitting at my desk, I can just check out what was said. I'll give you an example. The famous end of the 1966 World Cup, when Kenneth Woolstenholme, the commentator, the crowd is coming on the field, they think it's all over, it is now. And somebody wrote to me and said, but that is not the complete quotation. He says, they think it's all over, it is now, it's for. And somebody said, this is an example of an underquote, you see.
Yes.
So I thought, well, I better check this out before I put it in the programme. And, I was able just to summon it up instantly, the clip of the final word. So just an example.
But it's interesting, you mentioned films. You can check out a film quote from YouTube. In a way, that's a very good example of quotability declining, isn't it? Because there comes a point, like, I can't remember, of the past 20 odd years, and I love movies, how many quotable lines are there? They don't do them anymore. I mean, you're left all the time with, aren't you going back, what would be maybe the 1990s or something?
Yes.
At the very earliest?
I think they're more colloquial now. I think, if you think of great film quotations, all about Eve, fasten your seatbelt, it's going to be a bumpy night. Wonderful quotations. So you can check that out very easily. But I would think you're probably right in that recent films, the dialogue is more casual.
It's more casual and also just not memorable. I mean, I just don't think we look for those things in films, maybe.
I'm trying desperately to think of something.
Well, I was just thinking that the nearest I can think of is Show Me the Money, which is from Jerry Maguire, which is, I think, about 96, 7, something like that, with Tom Cruise. I can't really think of...
Well, there's Follow the Money.
Follow the Money, and that was from...
Yeah, Watergate.
Oh, all the President's Men.
Yeah. Yes. Follow the Money is quite the one. But I think you're right. Yes.
I mean, of all the people I mentioned, you must be asked this a lot, Nigel, but I would have thought this is, I'm going to ask it anyway. I mean, who are the people that you particularly stick in your mind? I mean, or that you're particularly pleased to have worked with? How many I think you said 900 guests?
950, I think.
900.
Something like that.
This is like a cultural history, almost.
Well, I think so. And if you go to my website, you can see they're all listed.
Yeah.
I don't think it's 950, actually. I think it must be 590. I think it's I got that wrong. Right. 590. But who stands out? Well, I can think of one very good example. It's funny how people's names just go.
Yes.
I mean, we had Malcolm Muggeridge on back in the 70s.
Yes.
People just don't know who Malcolm Muggeridge
is. No, they don't.
He hasn't got an afterlife, which may be the fate of broadcasters. I don't know. But Ludovic Kennedy. Right. Great champion of rights, human rights, legal matters and all the rest of it. And a fully rounded human being, I think one would say. And so he came on the programme, and I knew that, because I tend to know what they're going to be able to do. So I asked him to say, who said, "Kiss me, Hardy"? And this was Lord Nelson as he was dying on the Victory. And he just came out with a whole wonderful explication of that, and I said yes, but people say he didn't really say kiss me harder. He said kismet harder. No, he said. I don't think he would have understood what that meant, and I don't think I do. But that was just one example of somebody adding to the quotation and giving background to it and all the rest of it. So that's just one example.
Well, I mean, it's extraordinary array of names and people, and obviously, as you say, many of them are actually now disappearing into the mist of time, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, definitely.
Well, I think this is the fate of particularly perhaps broadcasters, and even though all these things will remain on YouTube, but I think, broadcasting is a thing of the moment.
Yeah.
Newspapers obviously last a little bit longer, and you can now access newspapers. But unless you've left something very tangible, which people can refer to and which resound beyond your death.
Can I just ask, by way of closing, I mean, 46 years of your programme. This is obviously not including, we haven't talked about all the books you've written.
Yeah.
In many respects, you sort of covered the whole of the post-war period of broadcasting. I mean, maybe not quite, but most of it. I mean, is there a period that you look back and think, now that was the best period to be in broadcasting?
Well, I started, as I said, at Granada in 1966, and Granada was a very interesting organisation, left-leaning, socialist conscience, if you like. Now has been completely destroyed, doesn't exist anymore, but it had this incredible, game plan in which it was immensely commercially successful with Coronation Street and things like that, but also produced world-class drama, and
Brideshead Revisited.
Brideshead Revisited, which included these wonderful actors, including Laurence Olivier, and Laurence Olivier did a whole series for Granada of great plays.
That's right.
Can you imagine that?
Laurence Olivier Presents.
Yes, that's
I
right.
remember watching.
Yes.
Because yes.
So that's when I started, and then I went to ITN, and then I moved into the BBC. And the BBC at that time, BBC Radio, I worked as a reporter, freelance reporter on the Today programme, the famous Today programme, which in those days was presented by a very sort of personality presenter called Jack D'Manio, who was not a journalist.
No.
It was very sort of lackadaisical, and he couldn't even tell the time, which was rather a difficult thing on a breakfast time programme. But I look back at that era when the Today programme was not what it is now. It was more of a magazine programme with a certain amount of current affairs element, but it wasn't this great flagship broadcasting outfit. I look back at that period with affection, and into the 70s, which is when my presenting career took off. I presented Kaleidoscope, the arts programme. I also acted in comedy shows, and then it all came together in quote unquote.
So, do you plan on taking it easy now, or are you going to do? You're going to write?
I don't think so. I think I'm retiring, but I will keep on doing my quotation work, which is, quite a thing. I think a sort of revolution has occurred with quotation research because of the internet and Google and the rest of it. And there are one or two of us who have really harnessed the internet and email and all the rest to do the research. Once upon a time, you had to write people letters.
Yes,
and wait for them to come across the Atlantic. But now it's sort of, and so I get requests all the time. Where does so and so come from? Where does so and so come from? And there are one or two people in America, particularly, where they're very hot on this, who do this full time. I mean, they run websites.
Well, there are quite a few websites, aren't there, to do with quotes? If you as you say, on Google, it's just they all come up and
but you have to be very careful because there is an awful lot of misinformation on the internet. But I can give you one example. There is a guy with the interesting name Garson O'Toole who runs a website called quoteinvestigator.com, and he is an absolute whiz, and he, as I say, harnesses the existence of the internet to research things, because an awful lot of books are now available on Google Books, for example, so you can research. I can just sort of, I wanted to find out the other day, what was it, some expression, oh, I can't remember what it was now, but I can go to Google Books and say, when is the first recorded example of this phrase?
Right, okay.
And you can find it. You have to be very careful. You have to be very careful not to rely entirely on what they throw up at you. But also, Garson is an absolute whiz. An awful lot of American newspapers are now on databases. So you can, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of American newspapers. There's the San Jose Bugle or what have you, and therefore you can go right through to find the earliest example, and he's an absolute whiz at this. So this has changed the way. Once upon a time, if you wanted to find out a quotation, you went to the Oxford Dictionary of Quotations.
Indeed, I used to have it myself.
Well, but now and it's changing all the time. So it's rather difficult to have a bit heavy book when you can just go online and dig things out.
You do the newsletter you referred to and have been doing for a long time.
Yeah.
Is that sort of freely available? Do people have to subscribe to that?
No, they just ask me and I send it to them.
Oh, right.
It's a
okay.
quarterly, yeah. It used to be subscription back in the days when it was a hard copy. But honestly, collecting subscriptions from all over the world is very hard work.
But if people want to see it or look at it, what? Oh, I see. Of course, yes. It's just purely by email because it's a newsletter. Okay. Right. But how would they get in? Would they go to? Do you have a website?
Yep.
Oh, I see.
Just quote unquote and
Quote unquote.
If you type in quote unquote newsletter, then you'll come to the website.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people will do that. Thank you, Nigel, for coming on, talking about this.
Pleasure.
This is great. And whatever you do or don't do, wish you all the best with it. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That's it for So What You're Saying Is. And, well, we shall see you next time. So thank you very much. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.